All right. So in this session, we worked on some of the biotechnology stuff and some of the ethics around biotechnology. And so let's talk about those real quick, and we'll see how things go. First of all, um, so let's say we have a bacteria, all right? There's the DNA. Bacteria are prokaryotes. So remember that prokaryotes do not have a nucleus, okay? And they do not have membrane bound organelles, okay? Um, and if you see a circular piece of DNA, pretend that's a circle, all right? That's what we call a plasmid. Now, these plasmids can naturally be taken up by a bacteria, and then the bacteria incorporates that DNA, and like a computer running a program, it does what the DNA says. So what we could do is if we use a restriction enzyme, restriction enzymes cut DNA, um, and they cut it at specific places. So we could have a plasmid and we can cut it, and so then we can have a gene from like a human for human insulin, and we can take that gene and insert it into the plasmid. Then the plasmid can be taken up by a bacteria who now not only has its own genes. Let's see, let's color code here. Oh, it's doing that thing again for some reason. All right. So it not only has its own genes, but it has the genes for human insulin. So this bacteria will now produce insulin or whatever that gene says. Okay. So that's kind of how we transform a bacteria so that it will produce something we want it to produce. Okay. Or we might modify it so that it can produce an enzyme that breaks down an oil spill. Okay. Let's see here. Um, Transformation like this is really important in medical applications and agricultural applications. We can make bacteria make medicine for us. We can have plants that are resistant to insects or herbicides or even pesticides. All right, and then talking about the ethics of biotechnology. Basically, we have benefits, right, from biotechnology. More food, um, easier medicines, more nutrition. We've genetically modified rice, and so that it will produce vitamin A, and it's called golden rice. You can look it up. So more nutrition. Okay. Um, Less pesticide use. Okay, because we can make plants naturally resistant to insects. Okay, but then what are the problems or the cons, so to speak? Okay, so we're still learning how biotechnology might affect ecosystems or human health when we eat genetically modified things. So there are some unknowns that we're researching. So far, the evidence says that we don't have to worry about eating genetically modified crops. Um, but they've only been around for 30 or 40 years, and so maybe we need to keep doing the research. Okay. Another concern. Let's see, Mike. There we go. Another concern would be that what if the modified crops get into a natural ecosystem? Could they outcompete and cause the extinction of native species? Okay. Could they? Um, could you end up with hybrid species that would be really hard to get rid of? So, and by hybrid, I mean a hybrid between um, a GMO and a native organism. Okay, so those are some of the concerns with genetically modified organisms. Um, Stem cells came up, and a stem cell is an undifferentiated cell or unspecialized. Okay, and so being undifferentiated, it can become any kind of cell. Remember, every cell in your body has all of your DNA. Now, a skin cell is differentiated. The genes for being skin are turned on and it's skin. A bone cell, the genes for being bone are turned on and your bone cells are bone cells. But in a stem cell, none of those genes are turned on yet. So it could become any kind of cell. All you got to do is turn on the right genes. All right. And so a hope of stem cells, for example, is if someone has all right, so let's say this is your skull and then you've got your spinal cord. If someone has a spinal cord injury, then what happens now is they're paralyzed from that injury down. So the hope is that maybe we could take stem cells and inject them into that injury, and then it would heal the spinal cord, and that person would be able to walk again. Okay. A controversy around stem cells is they used to be harvested from aborted fetuses, and but in the early 2000s, President George W. Bush signed a law, or maybe it was an executive order, I don't remember, that said in the U.S. we would no longer harvest stem cells from aborted fetuses, and that the um, they could keep using the cells they had already collected, but not collect any more. And we've also found new ways of getting stem cells without, like, from adults. And so that is helpful. And this research goes on. All right. Another concern with biotechnology is cloning. First of all, pretty much every country in the world has outlawed human cloning. We technically know how to do it, but there are some religious and cultural and societal concerns. And one concern right off the top of my head is, what rights would a clone have? We're still arguing about equal rights and civil liberties for people in this country. And we have people who are haves and we have people who are haves nots. And then we have people who have nothing. So we haven't figured how to be equal with other human beings, I don't think we should bring cloning into the mix. All right. But that is a major concern. What rights would clones have? As they would be living things, they would be copies of a human, but would they have equal rights to their source material? Okay. Another concern with cloning animals. Now there are animals that are cloned. It's really expensive, but if you can have like your cat or dog cloned after they pass away, um, but it's really expensive, and that's not really going to cause any problems if you can afford it. But then they also clone like cattle, like cows and stuff. Now, on one hand, this makes sense because you can then guarantee the quality, right, of the animals. But a downside, so these are the pros, a con is resist disease, right? Just like we talked about with the bananas, if a new disease comes along, like um, cow flu 2.0, all right, if it can wipe out one clone cow, it can wipe out all of the clone cows because they're all genetically identical. So then you go from having 500 cloned cows to 500 dead cloned cows. So I think, even ranchers who want to do this, they have to maintain some diversity in their cattle herds. Um, Another concern is whether or not the clone would be malformed. Like, could it be disfigured? Could the muscle tissue, which we call meat, could it be not right exactly? So those are some of the concerns with cloning. Um, And then lastly, this kind of goes to what we'll talk about Tuesday. But remember, DNA codes for the mRNA, right? And then the mRNA codes for the amino acids to make a protein, right? So the more similar the protein is, the more similar the mRNA is, which means the DNA is more similar. So the more similar the DNA or the more similar the protein, the more closely related the organisms are. All right, that's it for this video, and I'll see you next time.